Okay, good. So I've prepared some questions, and if there is even more questions from the audience, you're all very welcome to just ask in between, wherever you like. So the title of our symposium is Future Challenges in Water Resources Research, and the most important question for me would be, where do you see the challenges in water resources research, maybe especially in your field, or maybe even in a more broader context? So is there a specific challenge where you see, this is what I see already in the near future, or maybe for the more further future? Astrid, would you like to think from your perspective about that?
Yes, well, if I think about the main issues that Rijkswaterstaat, so the Dutch Ministry of Water Affairs, is dealing with, it's one of the main things is the replacement of hydraulic structures. Basically, all of the Dutch ones are at the end of their lifetime, and it will ask for a huge investment of manpower and time to design new ones. And another, but this is a point that is a little bit out of my research area. I mean, the topic of hydraulic structures. What is more in my research area is the problems associated with the. I haven't discussed the real problems that Rijkswaterstaat is dealing with related to the bed degradation, and I'm pretty sure that the German water management authorities are dealing with the same issues. But I haven't mentioned the problems. So the problems related to the bed degradation is that there are several areas in the river that do not degrade because there's man-made fixed layers in the river. There's also some natural areas that are hard to revolt, and those areas don't degrade, and they form silts and limit the maximum drafts of vessels. And has severe economic consequences. So Rijkswaterstaat is currently studying whether they want to reduce the elevation of those fixed layers. And those were constructed several decades ago in order to increase, for instance, the navigable width in sharp bends in Nijmegen and St. Andries in the Waal branch. But those form sills, and by now the area is determining the maximum draft of vessels sailing up to Germany is at those fixed layers.
Okay, so these are both topics which are related to constructions and are tending to enhance them again. Isn't there any other opportunity? Is this the future of our water research or our river engineering, that we keep all the fixed structures and for the sake of economy, and on the other hand we realize that we are losing our environmental quality, and this would be an opportunity to change something? Why not doing this? Why not going that way? I see that, money rules the world. But is it the future? If you're talking about future and we can dream, so Bridget, you just wanted to answer that?
Well, I guess I just wanted to say that in some systems, you've sort of, by building infrastructure a long way back, you've set yourself up in a position where you are really relying on that. So in the Columbia River Basin, for example, in the Pacific Northwest, we have 60% of our flood storage up in Canada, so we're relying on a multi-nation agreement for that storage. And then if that storage went away, or even if the storage in the US went away, there are cities that are at risk for major flooding events. So I think, certainly in some locations, there's places where it makes sense for change, away from infrastructure, but in other areas, maybe there isn't. It's interesting to hear that this aging of infrastructure thing is an issue in Europe, because it's certainly a big issue in the United States as well. So the Army Corps of Engineers has ratings for dams and canals and other sort of hydrologic engineering projects, and most of them are C and D level, versus an A being newer and not in need of repair anytime in the near future. So that's an issue in the U.S. as well.
Mm-hmm. But if you see that struggle or that tension between economy and ecology, so maybe Mrs. Palos, you can say something about the acceptance from society, or maybe you have any other thoughts about that?
But just adding to this whole infrastructure discussion, I think what is very promising now, or at least a positive movement, is this movement towards this more ecological or natural infrastructure, also Room for the River program. Mm-hmm. Also, for example, I work also in Canada, where the prairies, where we have one infrastructure, but there is, we will not protect big cities there. New infrastructure, but really by restoring parts of the wetlands in the prairies. For example, restore water in the landscape. So really, I think one of the, and that is more a seeming trade-off between economy and ecology. Obviously, the prairies, the farmers want their land. But if you make a larger kind of more economic balance calculation from all costs and benefits, and include also all the losses and the ecosystem services that are provided, I think from this broader perspective, then you would probably move towards different ways of taking ecosystem services into account. Like we need a broader acceptance to really bring ecology and the environment more to the center. We need a broad accounting for ecosystem services. And as I said, Room for the River, the flooding, this nature infrastructure is one approach to move there. And but still there is often vested interest to just probably emphasize a few economic benefits to the detriment of really destroying more, would say, the capital of the landscape, for example, with climate change, reservoirs. And in this respect, we have, I think, in terms of my field, we have a huge problem with implementation. Implementation.
Okay.
There is huge implementation challenge. There's lots of potential ideas out there which are partly not implemented due to you meet the resistance of a few people who might profit, but I think from a broader perspective, not necessarily.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that the acceptance has to be increased of these measures, but how can we reach this acceptance from society?
Not only from society, but from different groups. I think one thing could be awareness. Often, for example, just in Germany, in Europe, or the Water Framework Directive should be each citizen's business. I started to ask everyone, all right, the Framework Directive, what is that? Mm-hmm. So people, the water comes out of the tap, so you flush down your remnants, you won't see anymore. So we are so used to everything working, and I think it slowly, in our countries, now with the floods, I would say people just realize, things and there are things changing. So, but then from this also, for example, engaging citizens more or people more in measures. For example, the protection program for the Rhine, which I think it was already since 30 years. There's a flood program here. The bilateral program between France and Germany to build natural retention areas, and they had these 10 polders, where they also wanted to say, right, let's restore. Tulat did a great job, but he did a bit too much, so our floodplains have disappeared, and so restore some part of the flood plains only for technical storage. And there's been protests everywhere, citizen initiatives, and suddenly they did not involve people. Mm-hmm. So you need to get much more, even if it's more cumbersome, it takes time, engaging groups early on in order to build this kind of awareness.
Mm-hmm. So what I learned from that is, whatever we do, we can find technical solutions or maybe also more nature-based solutions, but as long as we don't take the people with us or we don't inform them and have them in our group or convinced about the system, nothing will help. So then it's all.
Yeah, unless you're in China, where people they just decide, okay, people, but I have to say I prefer our system. Yeah. Where still you engage people and try from early stage. Yeah. I think you have, and then for example also now the Rhine program they've changed. Now they ship school classes now to that is our older so people ownership. Mm-hmm. And often there are uncertainties. For example, some of the arguments in this respect from the citizen initiatives and so forth. So definitely acceptance is also built by engaging people in the things where they're concerned to. also I think trying to use more systemic approaches like use the service approach to show more the kind of linkages.
Mhm.
Okay. Issue.
Okay, thank you. So maybe Karina, do you have some thoughts about future challenges in the water resources research?
I think in my field, cyanobacteria blooms, there definitely is a big problem how we could prevent eutrophication. And I believe that this might be very challenging task because the climate change, this flooding you were talking about, it's going to bring more nutrients into the water bodies, and that will increase the blooms and also this temperature rising and all these things. I think, for example, in the Baltic Sea, I don't know what we can do in order to.
Okay, because if you talk about the temperature rise, so this is nothing what we can change very fast. Yeah?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering whether we even can change that. Yeah? So maybe I'm too pessimistic, but for sure it's nothing what will happen from one day to another. But nutrient content, so isn't there a chance to reduce the nutrient?
It has been done concerning the point sources, of course. We are developing effective ways to prevent nutrients from the point sources. But then there is agriculture and even forestry, those kind of ditching, these kind of wetlands directly to the water bodies, which has been happened in Finland, has been a big disadvantage for the water bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So there has been made very big mistakes previously because they have never understood ecosystems as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
That water is anyway ending to the water bodies in one point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you talk about all these topics, I see that we have a certain perspective on hydraulic structures, and a lot of people think like, oh, this is not environmental friendly, yeah, or methane emissions, these are greenhouse gas emissions, maybe this is not really friendly. Yeah? So cyanobacteria, this comes from nutrients, or nutrients, this is too high content of nutrients is not good. Yeah? So, but I'm never sure about biofilms. Is biofilm, is this good or is this not good? So what is the influence, or is it an indicator on something special? I can't really judge on that. So maybe it's not really necessary to do so, but maybe you have some more insights on
I
that.
don't think it's an indicator. They're going to be on every surface. I would think that they're rather beneficial. They are important for the self-liquefaction of the stream system, and also counting the specific aggregates of the river. Yeah, I don't think they indication or anything. I don't think they're bad, but I think they can also act as reservoirs for pathogens. For example, cholera can form biofilms of freshwater systems, and I think this is something which might get worse with climate change. So warming temperature might actually, I think, it increases problem. Not only, maybe not that much in streams and rivers, but more in things like drinking water systems, where the biofilms, of course, build up there. It's thin biofilms because our drinking water it's clean, there's low biomass and there's the nutrients in there, but still there's some biofilms, and they can act as a reservoir for pathogens. I think that rising temperatures might increase this problem.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I'm absolutely sure they're not bad.
Okay. So as we were talking about climate change and increase of temperature, I just recently read the book from Maja Lunde from Norway, The History of Water. I don't know whether anybody of you know that. No, she wrote a book before, which was The History of the Bees, which was very successful, and now she wrote this book, History of the Water. And the story behind this, that the temperature is increasing and people are running out of water and people are moving to other areas, and there's also part of the story that the Norwegians sell ice blocks from the glaciers to Arabian countries, which is a very good business on the other hand, because they are suffering from water and they take these little ice cubes for their drinks, which is something very special. And I thought, what is this part of the story? Nobody would sell ice cubes from the Norwegian glacier to the Arabian countries. 2 days ago, I heard in the news that Greenland wants to sell the melting water from their glaciers to the rest of the world to mitigate the water shortage. And I thought, this sounds very, very familiar. And they sell, I had the feeling, they sell it as something, this is very good to overcome the water crisis. And yes, on the one hand, we have the climate change, but we can profit from that and sell the water to the rest of the world. I thought that's the wrong world. I don't know what you are thinking about, but maybe you want to state on that, please.
I don't know yet how they would get it to that water, but because it's funny, because in I think about 50 years ago or so, we had a global water program where we were discussing the water as a global issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? And then we were also, and then one of the guys that was just ridiculing me from business said, we want to ship icebergs. Come on, water is no commodity, which is in principle right. You don't build pipes, and send it around the whole globe. But shipping icebergs, there have been now projects. Obviously, you don't have a small boat that's steering an iceberg, but you try to navigate across the currents. There are projects where they want to get an iceberg in front of the Canary Islands, and those other tourists who would be very attractive, and the melting water would support you. So I also don't think that this is the kind of right word, trying to remedy or these divergent rivers, like in China, you put the water from the Yangtze to the Yellow River. This is a gigantic project.
Yes.
But I don't think that it will be so easy to get the melted water from Greenland to the water-scarce country. But this idea of shipping iceberg, that has been now more seriously been discussed. And if they find solutions where it would, I think you lose obviously part on your journey. Or the iceberg going to Cape Town, for example. Cape Town has also offers, so they will ship your icebergs, like with the water prices.
Okay.
These things will come. If we have water shortages, people will look for these kind of solutions as well.
Okay.
And that is not a joke anymore, but that is now, I guess that's probably more likely than with virtual water that people really would give up food sovereignty. So. But I don't think that is the solution. But these things are now discussed, because people might have thought it's ridiculous some years ago.
Okay. So maybe then it's not the pressing issue of talking about hydraulic structures or biofilm or cyanobacteria, it's more the water distribution. Is this the most challenging part in the water resources research for the future? So maybe, if you do you have any idea on that or comment on that? Or
I just very briefly add, because I want to say in the beginning that one of the big things what I feel is acid changes when we manage floods. So there is somehow understanding their limitations, because what we've been doing, we've tried always to overcome the constraints of nature. So we have Phoenix and agglomerations in the desert, where Phoenix is a big agglomeration and fastest urban agglomeration in the US. So we always bring the water, or the Aral Sea has dried out, that you have all this cultivation. Well, it's the same with floods. We build these big dikes and we just go to landscape structure. We don't need to care about these fluctuations. And I think with floods there has been a certain degree of change, that you have to change the way we deal with floods. I don't see any similar kind of change with droughts. The droughts is very much, I also don't see that different countries can learn from each other. California has just gone on until they had the crisis. So I think there's a big issue about, it's not only distribution, it's also thinking about overexploitation in certain areas and really say we have to reduce land use, change land use. We probably can't have further urban developments in areas where you have no water. And that's probably much more intrusive in decision making and imposing restrictions to certain users than probably this was. But I think that is still a big challenge. Out there.
Yes, please.
I guess I can speak as someone that's working in the desert Southwest, and you just mentioned Phoenix, that there's similarities between moving an iceberg somewhere to relieve water shortage and, pumping water into the middle of the desert to support these huge populations. That it's worked so far, but, in the future that's likely not going to be the case. So in the desert Southwest, the Colorado River is vastly overallocated. They looked at a wet 20 years and made decisions about how to distribute water to the southwestern states based on, a situation that's no longer the case. So the two big reservoirs in that system haven't been they've been below half full since the 80s. And there's, not an indication that that's going to change. And I think that poses a lot of questions about how to manage those systems too, because the hydrologic variability is so vast and it's likely, to get more extreme in the future.
Maybe just that I'm thinking about this CO2 which is produced if I transport the water from one end of the world to the other. For food, we try to eat local produced food because it has a lower footprint and then taking the water from the other end of the world seems a very strange thing to do. So I would think that things like desalting water from the sea or improved possibilities to clean water, which is not drinking water quality, will be a better way to target this problem. It seems strange that I might buy some apple which has been produced just next door, but has been watered with water which comes from kilometers away.
Yeah, that's good. That doesn't make sense. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please.
When you're talking about new sources of water and you're talking about importing water from melting glacier, what are you? You were also talking about buying things local, but there's a potential lot of water in the atmosphere. What are you thinking about using this potential? You could do that locally. You don't have to import from another country very far away. So isn't there like the future where we have to push research in this direction? What do you think about that?
So is anybody expert in harvesting water from the atmosphere? I have to admit that I'm not an expert in that. Has anybody any experience in that? I can't really, or I think we can't really answer this question. I'm sorry for that. But I know that there is a lot of research going on on that, and there is even research. So even in the desert areas, you can harvest water from the atmosphere. But I have really no idea how much this is, whether this is enough, how to transfer it to other places. I'm sorry about that. I can't really answer that question.
If I'm imagining that they are thinking about importing a glacier through the whole sea to another country or to pump it in a desert, how can we then talk about but water harvesting from air is too expensive? I can't understand.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. So, and I think it's the wrong world or a strange world if you think about moving glaciers to Gran Canaria or Canary Islands.
Perhaps, as you mentioned, that local food production, we have certain areas where most of you might be also worthy of this idea of virtual water trade, which is we have so much water embedded in certain goods and services. So on one side we should reduce our water footprint, but on the other hand, in certain areas where you have too many people and very little water, one might consider to bring the food rather from areas where have much water than producing food there. Which is a question of food sovereignty. Countries often don't want it, but that's a question like you could argue whether you have the dry north in China, you have all the fields, and over the south you have the water. And then one possibility of what I would be that much more you try to bring the food to areas where you have more people and they can produce the food locally. That we would know. Or you remove the people, but I guess moving the people is even more difficult. But that is another issue where not always eating local food may be the most appropriate idea from the perspective of water use.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
As another additional resource for water, I mean, we all know that we have water scarcity. So what about water recycling and water reuse? Now we produce a lot of wastewater, and there are studies going on how we can reuse this wastewater. And what can be the opinion of the people? How can they accept to drink water which was wasted before? And what's your opinion about this as an optional resource for water?
So you all put here the question about the water reuse from wastewater. Anybody who is an expert or knows about that? And maybe also the acceptance of drinking again wastewater.
We have, I'm not an expert, but we have been working with colleagues in Australia, and there it's just common. The water, people have become used to it. And I think there is also other way you have water that is, you get it with water coming from, that is coming from water treatment plants. In South Africa you get it, and I don't think that it would be a major problem to overcome once you really have water scarcity in the countries where this is.
And I know there's a lot of research going on using grey water for irrigation or for toilets or so, and so there is a lot of things going on in that perspective to reuse the water as much as possible. You also have a comment on that?
Just as a side. The water of the wastewater treatment plant also goes back into the river at some point, like from the big wastewater treatment plant in Vienna, it goes back into the Danube, and from there it goes into the aquifer, and just a little bit away from the river, they're taken out of the ground again. So what we take as groundwater is often surface water which has been under the earth only for a very short time. So in a way it's kind of recycled water already. People just don't see it as that. And if the water quality of the river will decrease, of course the water quality of this groundwater, drinking water will get worse too. But in a way we already recycling water, people just don't know it, so it's probably better accepted that way.
Is there more questions? Technical questions? Yes, please.
Can I go back to my colleague question?
Could you a bit speak
Back to
louder?
the
Yeah.
topic and discussion. When we were wondering whether we have discovered that, for example, in Africa somewhere or Australia, I don't know, the water scarcity is to the point that it doesn't have a choice. So either there is a water recycle or nothing. But I'm wondering that we are a community of educated people who know completely deeply about water scarcity and how's the people opinion in Germany, for example, of using water coming directly from water treatment plant. Is it? Do we see a potential in countries which doesn't have a water scarcity that much?
I think this is the main issue, that we don't really have the problem of water scarcity at the moment. So there is no need at the moment. And in principle, it is, as Ms. Bessemer said, that we have already all the effluent from the wastewater treatment plant is going to rivers or little streams. And then we have an infiltration to in the groundwater area, and we use the drinking water, which is in the first view kind of groundwater, which is not really old groundwater, it's just filtered river water. And this is what we, by the way, also use in Stuttgart. We have half of the water is coming from the Lake Constance, and half of the water is coming from the Danube area, which is just filtrated water from the river. So it's used already. Any other questions? Yes?
I was just wondering has there been any change in the consumption patterns in the U.S. to get lower? Because that's one of the things that I see are the biggest factors in the amount of water that's used in the Southwest. Everything is crazy, and even with all the forest fires and the droughts and everything, it seems like the consumption patterns, in my perspective, have not changed. I don't know if you have a different perspective. And they're changing. People are actually getting more conscious of using less water in states. I would agree with you that hasn't fully happened. I mean, there's exceptions and examples of water conservation, like cities where you're only allowed to water your lawn on certain days, for example. But like as a big picture, whole Colorado River basin, no, not so much. And I think at least in Arizona, there have been programs that have aimed to recharge groundwater with extra water that's allocated to the state. So there's sort of this false perception of having this excess water supply, but Arizona is also one of the first states to get cut out once once the amount of water that's available to be allocated drops below the amount that we have in the reservoirs. So that groundwater storage, the perception of the supply might be very different from, what the supply actually is into the future. And I don't know, when that shift is going to happen. I mean, you look at Las Vegas and there's fountains everywhere going in the middle of the day. So,
If there's no more technical or questions, scientific questions, I would like to ask some maybe a bit more personal questions. Like maybe ask it first, and I would give this question to all of you. What was the reason that you have decided to go for studying civil engineering, choosing morphology or river morphology sediments as your profession? So how did it come, the decision to do exactly what you're doing now?
Basically, it's a passion for rivers.
Mm-hmm.
My passion is mostly aimed at natural rivers,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't have many in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
So I've become curious about our engineered rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I think the eagerness to understand and also the willingness or eagerness to coach and train new people.
Mm-hmm.
I like to train new people, young people, and educate them.
You already knew that when you started your education, so you knew that already in the beginning of the 20s?
While I was a student, I also was a student assistant
Mm-hmm.
or teaching assistant, as people call it in the States. So already as a student, I was helping train other students.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good. What's your motivation to do what you're doing now?
Well, I think the habitat streams happened more by chance. I was interested in ecology and I was interested in microbiology. So the obvious thing was to find a master thesis in microbial ecology. I just had several courses on this topic and I found them most interesting. So I looked for a master thesis in this field and ended up in the Department of Ecology. And there I later met Tom Batin, who was working on biofoams. So from working on planktonic bacteria, I went on working on biofoams.
So it's also kind of by chance.
Yeah, it's kind of by chance. I wanted to go to microbial ecology, but there was no department of microbial ecology at the time in Vienna. Now there is one, but it's much more technical. They're more working in wastewater treatment plants. So had it been there, maybe I would have gone there. But working in streams was what I got chance. Working on microbial ecology was not because it was what I was interested most in. And also when I started these technologies to sequence microorganisms from the environment, they were pretty new. Was something that I found very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Was a lot of things were still based on culture and cloning at the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have a special motivation moment?
Yeah, possibly might also show up at the picture tomorrow. I'm not going to read everything. But I would say my pathway is probably more like a meandering river, or straightforward, very meandering. I originally studied chemistry and biology, and much related to water, that's going to the environment. I also was 1 year in pharmaceutical industry. So my husband has been working, and then there was a major event when I decided I need to save the planet. There was a big accident in Basel, the sauna accident. And then I went for 1 year to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, did some postgrad study. And I worked at ERWAC, most of you may know ERWAC for quite some time. And I thought everyone there must be only fully motivated to save the planet, collaborate, and I had a steep learning path, yes. Very much in the environment to learn as well. Things work a bit differently in this kind of settings. And then I became a professor in Germany. And there I had been very lucky because to come as a non-water person to Germany, Professor of Resources Management, and become so successful also in the water field, I was really like a scale jump I had with a colleague come out from the Netherlands. We had one of the biggest water management projects at the EU level. So we were very innovative. And then I really also I really had a possibility to build up these international networks. And why am I now not a natural, let's say, not working as a natural scientist anymore, but have moved to the social sciences? I was just driven by trying to understand where is the bottleneck. Mm-hmm. And when I really look, as I write, we know all this about, we have an improved understanding about the environment, about the complexities, about the interdependencies, but nothing's happened. Mm-hmm. And so first I went to try to communicate this, what we've insights to people, but then as I write, I need to better understand why and how really these societal processes are working. Then over time, I shifted to working more in social science. Yeah. Okay. And now I like it quite a bit now in the possibility.
Okay. Karina, did you have any special motivation moment which changed your life?
Even at school, I was keen on biology. Biology was very interesting. And when I started my studies at the university, I first started to study environmental conservation, and I thought, like you guys, that I will save the world. And I'm still trying to do it. Then I realized that microbiology was very attractive, and I started to study my PhD, and I was reading articles, and I found that in America, in some other places, cyanobacteria can be toxic, and then I started to think about what about Finland. We have so many lakes, and also Baltic Sea is there, and that started the whole process. And when you solved first question, there always came new questions, and I'm trying to answer those over the years.
That's to try for research. You answer one question and you have 10 more.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, great. How about your motivation?
I was always interested in environmental science, but I think it was a couple of professors that really inspired me and sort of spoke my language. And the first of them was in undergrad. I had a biogeochemistry class and was just fascinated with this idea of picturing, things that we can't see, like nitrogen and how they move through the environment and affect energy flow. And as part of working with that professor, I got to go to East Africa and study some rivers draining into Lake Tanganyika, which is one of these big Rift Valley lakes out there. And some of the rivers were really disturbed and deforested, so we were comparing kind of systems that were more impacted to those that weren't. And as part of that whole experience, I don't know if this will be in my Petra Kua, because I wrote about this a little bit in my answers, but I got really sick. I ended up wading into a stream where there was schistosomiasis in the water, and I didn't have waders on because that was sort of culturally not cool to be going into someone's stream all, protected in your wader setup. And I was one of like 5% of people that get really, really sick and ended up in the hospital back in the States, and no one knew what was wrong with me. So I got down to like 95 pounds. It was just a really scary experience to go through, and I think that sort of solidified like the importance of understanding human impacts on aquatic systems and how important water is as a resource. I mean, of course for drinking, but also it can be a carrier of pathogens, and just something that we need to protect and understand. So that's really big picture. And then in grad school, my PhD advisor was really, really inspiring as well, and got me into reservoirs. And sort of there, I was able to think about management and water quality and kind of where those intersect.
Okay, maybe the last question for all of you before we start to go for dinner. As we have a subtitle, Powerful Women in Science, and we have a lot of young researchers here, I would be curious to learn a bit more about, did you have any supporters during your career, any opponents that you had to fight against? Is there any good advice for the young scientists how to go on in their scientific career? from your perspective, your personal perspective, maybe a little advice?
So my personal advice is to find a research area or an area that you work in that you love, that you're passionate about. If you're passionate about the topic, you love to learn, it's easy also to learn. And I can also confirm what you just said. If you have some, even if it's just a limited number of very inspirational persons in your environment, this can have a very big, or this has a very big impact. And I was lucky in that sense. So I used to, when I did my PhD, I worked with Gary Parker in the US, who was one of my professors, besides Huib de Vriend, a Dutch professor. So Huib de Vriend retired, but both were very inspirational in a different sense. I had another advisor who was more of a conservative type of thinker, but really rigorous. So all of those people, they taught me different skills and different elements, and they contributed different things, and I appreciated what they taught me.
Mm-hmm.
So those, find people that you like to learn from and that you feel a connection with.
Mm-hmm. So it means take the advantage of people who inspire you and leave the others
Yes.
behind.
Find them,
Yes.
them, and you have a lot of power in that sense, and take the liberty that you have. I mean, those people are out there.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to be lucky. You just need to create it.
Okay. So from your personal perspective, we were just talking about, is there anybody who supported you, any supporter, mentor, or anybody else who maybe was not that supportive, who were just trying to keep you back? Or is there any advice that you could give to the young researchers to push their career?
Somewhat there was definitely somebody who really pushed me and inspired me. So working in his group was definitely one of the best things I did.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't so sure whether I should start in his group at the beginning, because actually I wanted to go away from Vienna for my PhD, but then he just offered me this PhD position, and afterwards I said, yeah, well, why not? It was really one of the best decisions of my life to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Tom would definitely be one of the most inspiring persons.
Mm-hmm.
Advice, I don't know. I would say that when you're working as a PhD student, already maybe try to develop your own ideas, because you don't want to get a copy of your advisor.
Mm-hmm.
More very well, very good, and you very inspire you, but still you don't want to be copy paste of your advisor. So I think just start having your own ideas about your topic of research early, and don't be shy. Don't think the idea might be stupid. Just talk to other people. It's probably a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I can also only support that you should be very much fascinated with what you're doing, and I think much more also follow your intrinsic motivation, and there's too much often short-term kind of incentives to really follow. I guess try to develop your own unique career path rather than becoming streamlined, which is currently very much supported. In terms of inspiring, I feel that, let's say my own experience, which I don't think that as a recommendation, but from my own experience it was much more resistance against things I didn't like, fighting against being suppressed, both in terms of what I felt is leadership, in terms of what I felt is the science I want to do, and this, as I'm still born, despite of not too supporting kinds of advice, but probably that was one of the reasons that I fought it through. But I would say it would be much better to really actively look for mentoring. I am very much on mentoring programs. I have been, to be honest, when I went to this science world, I had really been naive.
Mm-hmm.
Very naive in terms of what science is all about. Power is absent from there. and just try also to understand how things are working. And that understanding it early enough, I think you just find out how to behave, but also it doesn't destroy your own. Because there are very, very positive elements in science as well. It's fun, it's great, you have a lot of freedom, but you also need to become aware of other kind of things that are important for your career. And I think getting mentoring from an early stage can also be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely develop your own ideas.
Okay. Yeah.
So when I decided to study toxic science bacteria, I wrote a grant application. Of course, I needed money. And then Academy of Finland, who is funding basic research in Finland, they said that you cannot apply because you are not a doctor. So I went to the professor of microbiology professor and asked if he could sign this application, and he said that I could sign it if it doesn't mean any work for me. So, but he turned out to supporting me a lot during the period of difficult times. I experienced at the beginning of my career all kind of pushing down because I was female. I advise girls that don't be too kind. You, in order to go for your goals, you have to toughen yourself and be motivated and go for it. And don't let anybody push you down at all. So, and later in my career, I have had a very, very nice colleagues and supporters. For example, I spent time at the University of Chicago, and the professor there has been supporting me ever since. He has written all kinds of recommendation letters, and I have needed those. And now I'm also mentoring a young scientist and hope to help them in future.
Mm-hmm. Richard.
Yeah, I guess for me, I've been lucky to be surrounded by people that are really supportive, and I think kind of moving forward and moving out of my PhD and now in my postdoc, I'm realizing also the importance of supportive colleagues, finding people that you can communicate well with, whose skills kind of match yours, but they have their own thing to bring. They complement your skill set, I guess, and they have their own expertise, but you can communicate with them enough to do something bigger than just yourself. I think that's really powerful because, you know, when multiple minds get together, you can produce something bigger than you would if you were just trying to lead the charge all alone. And I think that part of making that effective is finding people that care about the science more than they care about like having their name first on a paper or their own personal agenda or, you know, kind of keeping data to themselves. Which I have also bumped into people like early on in collaborations where I've realized that was going on and it wasn't going to be helpful to me to kind of continue to engage in that.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think this gave a nice overview about some ideas for the future work and also about your career, and maybe this is an inspiration also for the young scientists here in the room and also an inspiration for those who are more settled in terms of specific research topics. I think that's a good moment to finalize the first day.